In the drought-stricken plains of Valoria Territory, 1876, a widow's calloused hands could craft intricate irrigation systems at dawn and design lethal hunting traps by moonlight. Sophia Thorne had mastered survival tactics and strategic defense before most frontiersmen had staked their first claim. But when the ruthless Carver gang rode onto her land with torches and threats, they mistook her for just another desperate homesteader clinging to parched earth. That mistake would lead them into a labyrinth of death from which few would escape. The relentless summer sun beat down upon Thornwood Farm, baking the golden wheat fields that stood as a defiant testament to Sophia Thorne's ingenuity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Other farms in Valoria Territory had withered and died during the 3-year drought, their owners retreating to towns or heading east with broken spirits and empty pockets. But Sophia's fields remained vibrant, nourished by the elaborate network of underground irrigation channels she had designed and implemented with her own hands. At 43, Sophia possessed a weathered beauty that spoke of years under harsh sun and harsher circumstances. Her once auburn hair, now streaked with silver, was typically bound in a tight braid that hung between her shoulder blades. Her eyes, the color of weathered sage, missed nothing, a trait that had kept her alive when others perished in this unforgiving landscape. "Ma'am, riders coming from the South Road," called Eli, her foreman, from the edge of the eastern field. At 26, he'd been one of many desperate young men who'd sought work during the drought's early days. Unlike the others, he'd recognized something in Sophia worth respecting, an intelligence that went far beyond farming. Sophia straightened, one hand shielding her eyes as she followed Eli's pointing finger toward the dust cloud rising on the horizon. Through the heat shimmer, she could make out 5 riders approaching at a steady pace. Not merchants, she observed, too well armed for travelers. Her voice remained calm, but her mind was already categorizing potential threats and responses, a habit formed during the long years alone in this lawless territory. "Want me to sound the bell?" Eli asked, his hand moving instinctively toward the revolver at his hip. Sophia considered for a moment. "Not yet. Let's see what they want first." Inside the sprawling farmhouse that her husband Jacob had built 15 years earlier, hidden compartments contained weapons of every description. Behind sliding panels and beneath false floorboards lay coils of tripwire, steel traps, and handcrafted grenades made from black powder and nails. Every window had been modified to serve as a firing position, every door reinforced to withstand battering. What few people realized was that half the designs for Thornwood's defenses had originated in Sophia's mind years before necessity demanded. Their implementation. "A frontier wife should understand protection," Jacob had said when teaching Sophia to shoot, to track, to build defensive barriers. But a smart frontier wife improves upon it. Jacob Thorne had recognized his wife's natural gift for strategic thinking long before their marriage, often remarking that had she been born a man, she would have become a celebrated military commander instead of a farmer's wife. The Thorne name had become legendary throughout Valoria Territory. Jacob Thorne, the man who could make a defensible homestead from nothing but scrubland and determination. His innovative water conservation systems and hunting skills had saved countless neighboring families during the territory's early years. But Jacob had been gone now for 5 years, ambushed by bandits while returning from a supply run to Fort Callahan, leaving Sophia to manage their farm and legacy alone. Sophia paused by the kitchen window, her gaze drifting to the lone cottonwood tree where Jacob had been laid to rest according to his wishes, overlooking the farm he'd loved. Beside his marker stood a smaller wooden cross, their only son Daniel, taken by scarlet fever the year after his father's death. The pain had dulled, With time but never truly disappeared, Miss Sophia, called a voice from the doorway. Mei Lin, the young Chinese woman who had escaped an indentured contract in the nearby mining town 3 years ago, stood with her hands folded before her. At 20, she had shown such aptitude for Sophia's defense systems that she'd become indispensable. To Thornwood's operation, Sheriff Parker rode through earlier, Mei Lin continued, her English precise and careful. Said to warn you that the Carver gang crossed into Valoria 2 days ago. Sophia's hands stilled on the rifle she'd been cleaning. The Carver gang, not common bandits, but an organized crew of ex-soldiers and criminals with a reputation for systematic terror. They'd become infamous throughout the Western Territories for their method of clearing valuable land, targeting successful homesteads with escalating violence until the owners abandoned their claims. Did the sheriff say if they're working for someone? Sophia asked, her voice level, despite the cold dread forming in her stomach. Whitmore Mining Company, he thinks, Mei Lin confirmed. They want the water rights to this whole valley. 3 farms west of here have already burned. The Johnsons left yesterday, just packed up and fled after their barn was torched. Sophia nodded slowly, processing this information against what she already knew of regional politics and economic pressures. Water was more valuable than gold in these parts, and Thornwood Farm controlled the most reliable sources in 50 miles. Tell Eli to bring the men in from the far fields, she said after a moment's thought, and have Miguel move the extra ammunition from the smokehouse to the root cellar. As Mei Lin departed on her errands, Sophia moved to a worn cabinet in her bedroom. From a hidden compartment behind a false panel, she withdrew a leather-bound journal, not Jacob's, but her own. Where her husband had been skilled at building physical defenses, Sophia's specialty had always been in understanding how people moved, predicting their actions, creating scenarios that led opponents exactly where she wanted them. For the next 2 hours, she studied maps of her property, making notes and calculations. When Eli arrived to report that all hands had been called in from the fields, he found her at the kitchen table surrounded by diagrams. Miss Sophia, he asked hesitantly, what are we facing? War, she replied simply, not looking up from her work. A war for Thornwood that's been coming since the drought began. Over the next 3 days, Thornwood Farm underwent subtle transformations. To untrained eyes, the workers appeared to be conducting routine summer maintenance, reinforcing fences, clearing brush along the perimeter, moving equipment between outbuildings. Only Sophia's core group, Eli, Mei Lin, Miguel, and the twins Jonas and Jeremiah, understood they were following a carefully orchestrated plan. The north field needs to be flooded tonight, Sophia instructed, pointing to a seemingly arbitrary section of the property. Divert water from the main reservoir through the secondary channels, but leave the ground looking dry on the surface. Yes, ma'am, Eli replied, increasingly impressed as Sophia's strategy began taking shape. Mei Lin, I need the trigger mechanisms set at all the marked positions by sunset. Miguel will help you camouflage them. The Chinese woman nodded, her delicate fingers already assembling the intricate pressure plates that would activate various traps throughout the property. Her time working in a munitions factory before being sold into servitude had given her skills that proved invaluable to Sophia's plans. Jonas, Jeremiah, Sophia continued, turning to the identical twin brothers whose sharpshooting abilities were renowned throughout the territory. I need false firing positions established in the west and south barns. Make them obvious enough to draw attention, but not so obvious they look like bait. By the 4th morning, Sophia spotted the same dust cloud from earlier approaching Thornwood's main gate. Through Jacob's old spyglass, she counted 8 riders, heavily armed, with the unmistakable posture of men accustomed to violence. At their head rode a broad-shouldered figure with a distinctive red bandana tied around his neck, Gabriel Carver himself, whose name inspired terror throughout 3 territories. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "They're coming," she announced to her assembled workers in the kitchen. "Remember everything we've planned. No one acts without my signal. No one tries to be a hero." The men and women around her table nodded solemnly. They weren't just fighting for a job or a paycheck. They were defending the only safe haven many of them had ever known. Sophia had taken in outcasts, immigrants, those fleeing violent pasts or escaping prejudice. In return, they gave her a fierce loyalty that no amount of money could buy. "Miss Sophia," Eli said quietly, as the others dispersed to their positions, "you should know, we sent word to some of the other homesteads. If things get bad, there are people who'll come." She touched his arm briefly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The more people involved, the higher the risk of someone getting hurt." The riders drew closer, hooves kicking up dust from the dry summer road. Sophia continued her work in the garden, seemingly oblivious to their approach. Inside, she began the mental countdown that would set her plan in motion. Gabriel Carver reined his horse to a stop at Sophia's gate, the animal's hooves stirring small clouds of dust in the dry summer air. Up close, Sophia could see the cruelty etched into his face, a diagonal scar running from his right eye to his jaw, skin weathered from years of outdoor violence, eyes that assessed everything with cold calculation. He matched the description Sheriff Parker had provided. Gabriel Carver, former Confederate cavalry officer, now the commanding presence behind a gang of killers who specialized in land clearance for wealthy interests. "Afternoon, ma'am," Carver called out, his voice carrying a practiced politeness that did nothing to mask its underlying threat. "Mighty fine property you have here." Sophia set down her gardening tools deliberately, taking her time as she straightened and brushed soil from her hands. She'd learned from Jacob that controlling the pace of an encounter often determined its outcome. "Thank you," she replied simply, pitching her voice to sound slightly uncertain. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" Carver removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Gabriel Carver, ma'am. My associates and I represent certain investment interests in the region." He gestured to the men flanking him, a collection of hard-faced individuals whose relaxed postures couldn't quite hide their readiness for violence. "We're surveying properties for potential business opportunities." "Investment interests?" Sophia echoed, injecting just the right amount of confusion into her tone. "I'm afraid I don't understand what business you might have with my farm, Mr. Carver." From her peripheral vision, Sophia noted how the riders had positioned themselves, not clustered together as casual visitors might be, but spread at intervals that allowed clear lines of sight across her property. Military formation, just as she'd anticipated. She mentally adjusted her timetable, recognizing that these men were more disciplined than the average bandit gang. "Mrs. Carver," let the question hang. "Thorne, Sophia Thorne." A flash of recognition crossed Carver's face. Thorne. Any relation to Jacob Thorne, the homesteader who designed those underground irrigation systems? Sophia allowed genuine surprise to show. "My late husband. Did you know him?" Carver's smile tightened. "Knew of him. Brilliant man from what I heard. Never had the pleasure of meeting him myself." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Heard he passed some years back. Must be difficult managing such a large operation on your own, Mrs. Thorne." "I manage well enough, Mr. Carver," Sophia answered, her hand instinctively touching the wedding band she still wore on a chain around her neck. "My husband taught me everything I need to know about running this farm." One of Carver's men, a wiry individual with a pockmarked face and tobacco-stained teeth, spat on the ground. "Whole territory's moving forward, ma'am. Whitmore Mining bringing progress. Shame to get left behind because of sentimentality." Sophia noted this man's demeanor, less controlled than the others, eager to intimidate. Every group had its impulsive, element. Jacob had taught her to identify such weaknesses in an opposing force. This man would be the first to act rashly under pressure. "I believe Mrs. Thorne hasn't heard about the recent troubles in the valley," Carver said, his tone solicitous while his eyes remained calculating. "Terrible accidents befalling some of the farms. The Johnson place had a fire just last week. Complete loss." "I heard," Sophia said. "Sheriff Parker mentioned it." "Did he now?" Carver exchanged glances with his men. "The sheriff is certainly attentive, but I fear even he can't be everywhere at once." He leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "The Whitmore Mining Company is offering fair compensation for land rights, Mrs. Thorne. More than fair, considering the unpredictable nature of farming these days." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Sophia allowed herself to appear, momentarily flustered, clutching her apron, as if seeking comfort. I hadn't considered selling. This land has been in my husband's family for—" "Progress doesn't much care for family history, ma'am," interrupted the pockmarked man, earning a sharp glance from Carver that silenced him immediately. "What my associate means," Carver continued smoothly, "is that change is inevitable. The smart play is to benefit from it rather than resist it." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. "Here's the mining company's initial offer. I encourage you to review it carefully. We'll return tomorrow for your answer." As Sophia reached for the envelope, she noticed the holster on Carver's hip wasn't standard civilian issue. It was a military cavalry holster modified for quicker draws. The other men carried their weapons similarly, positioned for efficiency rather than show. These weren't mere bandits. They were trained killers accustomed to coordinated action. "Mr. Carver," Sophia said, her voice deliberately trembling slightly, "I'm a simple widow trying to preserve my husband's legacy. I don't want any trouble." Carver's expression softened, but his eyes remained watchful. "No one wants trouble, Mrs. Thorne. That's why I'm offering you a clean, simple transaction. Others in the valley have already seen the wisdom in this approach." After their unfortunate accidents, Sophia added quietly, a flicker of something, annoyance. Perhaps respect crossed Carver's face. Accidents happen, especially to those who stand alone against the tide of progress. He settled his hat back on his head. "We'll return tomorrow, Mrs. Thorne. I do hope you'll make the sensible choice." As the riders turned to leave, the youngest of them, barely more than 20, with sandy hair and ill-fitting clothes, lagged behind. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "might we trouble you for water for our horses? Been a long ride." "Of course," Sophia replied, gesturing toward the well near the barn. "Help yourselves." This request, seemingly innocent, confirmed another of Sophia's suspicions. They wanted a closer look at her property, a chance to assess its vulnerabilities. As they watered their horses, she watched how their eyes catalogued the layout of her farm, noting entry points, structures, sightlines, exactly as she would have done when planning a tactical approach. From the corner of her eye, Sophia saw Eli, observing from the edge of the wheat field, his hand resting near the revolver he carried for protection against coyotes and other predators. She gave him an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Not yet." "Fine horses," Sophia commented, approaching Carver as he stood by the well. "That bay has military training, doesn't it? The way he stands at attention." Surprise flickered across Carver's face before he masked it. "You have a good eye, Mrs. Thorne. My husband loved his cavalry mount," she explained. "Taught me what to look for in a well-trained horse." She paused, then added deliberately, "Jacob always said you could tell more about a man's intentions by watching his horse than by listening to his words." The message wasn't lost on Carver. His eyes narrowed slightly as he reassessed the widow before him. "Your husband sounds like a wise man, Mrs. Thorne. I hope some of that wisdom extends to his widow." He mounted his bay with practiced ease. Until tomorrow. As the Carver gang rode away, Sophia remained by the well, her posture that of a concerned, slightly overwhelmed widow. Only when they disappeared around the bend did she straighten, her eyes hardening with resolve. Eli approached, his young face tight with anger. "They're threatening you, Miss Sophia, plain as day." "Yes," Sophia agreed calmly, "and they've just told me exactly how they plan to do it." She turned to him, her earlier vulnerability completely gone. "They'll start with fire. Eli, tonight, most likely, the east wheat field where it borders the stream bed. It's been done before. Burn crops, then blame it on the drought and lightning. How can you be sure?" "Because it's what I would do," Sophia replied. "It's the most valuable crop, the farthest from the house, with a natural escape route along. The dry stream bed." She began walking toward the barn, her stride purposeful. "Tell Jonas and Jeremiah to move the water wagon behind the lower hayfield after dark, out of sight from the road, and check that the pressure plates May-Lin installed yesterday are properly concealed." "Yes, ma'am," Eli said, then hesitated. "Should I ride for Sheriff Parker?" Sophia shook her head. "Not yet. Carver would have men watching for that." She paused at the barn door, looking back over the farm, her farm, with the tactician's eye that Jacob had helped her develop. "They think they're setting the terms of engagement, Eli. Let them believe that a little longer." Inside the barn, Sophia unlocked a trunk hidden beneath sacks of feed. From it, she removed a brass spyglass and her husband's old service revolver, checking it with practiced hands that belied her farmer's appearance. "They see a vulnerable widow," she murmured to herself. "But Jacob didn't marry me for my vulnerability." She slid the revolver into her apron pocket. "He married me because I could outthink every man in Valoria territory." As dusk descended over Thornwood Farm, Sophia Thorne prepared to meet fire with strategy and intimidation, with a carefully laid trap, years in the making. The Carver gang was about to discover that they hadn't invaded a defenseless widow's farm. They had entered a labyrinth designed by a master strategist who had anticipated their every move. Twilight settled over Thornwood Farm like a violet shroud, bringing with it the bitter scent of sage and dust. Sophia moved through her evening routine with practiced efficiency, lighting oil lamps in the downstairs windows of her farmhouse, feeding the chickens, and checking the livestock in the barn. To anyone watching from a distance, and she was certain Carver had left men to observe, she appeared to be going about the ordinary tasks of a farmer's widow preparing for nightfall. But Sophia's mind was mapping contingencies, calculating response times, and reviewing the elaborate web of defenses she had spent years perfecting. Each seemingly mundane action concealed a secondary purpose in her developing strategy. "Jonas," she called to one of the twin sharpshooters as she emerged from the chicken coop, "don't forget to leave the east gate unlatched tonight." She kept her voice loud enough to carry, her tone suggesting nothing more than a routine reminder. "Yes, ma'am," Jonas replied, catching her subtle wink. He had worked for the Thorns for 10 years and understood that the instruction was far from ordinary. The east gate was always secured at night to keep predators away from the livestock. As darkness fell completely, Sophia sat in her rocking chair on the front porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the summer warmth. She kept a small oil lamp beside her and opened a Bible in her lap, the very picture of a God-fearing widow finding solace in Scripture before bed. Anyone watching would see a harmless, perhaps slightly pitiable figure. What they couldn't see was that beneath the Bible lay one of Jacob's hand-drawn maps of the property, or that Sophia's seemingly absent gaze regularly scanned specific sectors of her farm in a disciplined pattern. The rocking chair hadn't been placed for comfort, but because it offered optimal sightlines to the approach routes she'd identified as most likely for a nighttime incursion. "They'll wait until after midnight," she murmured to herself, turning, a page in her Bible while making a mental calculation. "Carver is too disciplined to move earlier. At precisely 9 o'clock, Sophia rose from her chair, stretched visibly, and carried her lamp inside. She moved from room to room, extinguishing lights in a pattern that suggested she was preparing for bed. The last lamp she left burning was in her bedroom, visible from the road, a beacon announcing her location to any observers. Once the house appeared settled for the night, Sophia's true work began. In the darkened kitchen, she met with her core. Team: Eli, Maylin, Miguel, and the twins. These weren't just farmhands, they were survivors who had found refuge at Thornwood and learned to defend it. Carver will send men to torch the eastern wheat field tonight, Sophia explained. Her voice transformed from the slightly hesitant widow to that of a commanding officer. She spread a hand-drawn map on the kitchen table. Based on their assessment, today they'll approach along the dry stream bed using it for cover. Shouldn't we just shoot them when they come? Jeremiah asked, his weathered hand resting near the rifle leaning against his chair. Sophia shook her head. That's exactly what they want. A direct confrontation gives them justification to bring their full force against us. Remember, they're portraying themselves as legitimate business agents. We need to undermine that facade. So what's the plan, Miss Sophia? Miguel asked. The Mexican man had fled north after his family's ranch was seized by corrupt officials, finding in Sophia a leader who valued his intelligence and skill with explosives. They expect to find a poorly defended farm with an east field ripe for burning. Instead, they'll encounter the first phase of our response. Her eyes, sharp in the low lamplight, met each person's gaze. Carver is testing us tonight. Let's show him just enough to make him reconsider his approach without revealing our full capabilities. For the next 20 minutes, Sophia outlined their preparations and response. The team listened attentively, occasionally offering suggestions that she considered with the same respect Jacob had always shown his friends and neighbors. This was the Sophia few people ever saw, the strategic mind that had quietly contributed to some of Jacob's most celebrated innovations in frontier defense. Remember, she concluded, this isn't a battle we're fighting tonight. It's simply the opening move in a longer campaign. As her team dispersed to their positions, Maylin lingered. Behind, Miss Sophia, she said hesitantly, the men and I have been talking. If things get dangerous, I won't be taking unnecessary risks, Maylin. Sophia interrupted gently. Jacob wouldn't have wanted that. She picked up her husband's brass spyglass from the table, but he also wouldn't have wanted me to surrender what we built together to men like Carver. After her team had gone, Sophia changed from her day dress into more practical attire, dark trousers usually reserved for the hardest farm work, a black shirt that wouldn't catch on underbrush or reflect light, sturdy boots that Jacob had custom-made for her years ago, and a wide-brimmed hat to shadow her face. Around her waist, she buckled a leather belt that held Jacob's service revolver and a small pouch containing other essentials. In her bedroom, Sophia arranged pillows under the blankets to create the impression of a sleeping figure. She placed her nightgown visibly across a chair and left a single lamp burning low, creating shadows that would suggest her presence to anyone watching from outside. Then she slipped through a concealed door behind the kitchen pantry that led to a root cellar. Jacob had modified the cellar years ago, adding a narrow tunnel that emerged in a small equipment shed 50 yards behind the house. An escape route designed during more dangerous times when Indian raids were common. The night air was cool against Sophia's face as she emerged from the tunnel. She crouched in the shadows for several minutes, allowing her eyes to adjust fully to the darkness and listening intently for any sound that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of her farm. Satisfied that her movement had gone undetected, Sophia made her way to an observation post she had prepared that afternoon, a modified hunting blind positioned in a dense thicket overlooking both the eastern wheat field and the dry stream bed beyond it. From her vantage point, Sophia could monitor her property and direct her team using a system of lantern signals they had established earlier. Arrangements that would have made Jacob proud in their simplicity and effectiveness. As midnight approached, Sophia settled into the practiced stillness she had learned during countless hunting trips with her father and later with Jacob. Her breathing slowed, her senses heightened, and her mind achieved the calm clarity she needed for the task ahead. A faint rustling from the direction of the stream bed snapped Sophia's attention back to the present. Through her spyglass, she detected movement, darker shadows separating from the natural darkness along the water's edge. She counted 4 figures moving with the purposeful stealth of men trying to avoid detection. Right on schedule, she whispered to herself, reaching for the covered lantern at her side. With practiced movements, she flashed a brief signal. 2 short bursts of light that would be visible only to Jonas, positioned in the old oak tree at the edge of the property. The signal transmitted a simple message: "Operation begun. Proceed as planned." Sophia Thorne, the unassuming widow, faded completely. As Sophia Thorne, the strategist, took full command, the farm that had seemed vulnerable and poorly defended in daylight was about to reveal the first layer of its carefully constructed defenses, and Gabriel Carver's men were walking directly into her trap. The 4 men from the Carver gang moved. With practiced precision through the shadows along the stream bed, they maintained proper spacing and paused at regular intervals to listen for any sign of detection. Through her spyglass, Sophia could identify the pockmarked man from earlier leading the group, his movements betraying an eagerness that contrasted with the disciplined stealth of his companions. The intruders carried cloth-wrapped bundles that Sophia recognized immediately as torches, along with what appeared to be containers of coal oil. Their intentions were unmistakable: set a fire large enough to destroy a significant portion of her wheat crop, but controlled enough to appear as a tragic accident rather than deliberate arson. Sophia watched as they reached the eastern edge of her property, where the dry stream bed curved alongside her prized wheat field. The crop stood golden and heavy with grain, nearly ready for harvest after months of careful tending. In normal circumstances, it would have been completely vulnerable to fire, especially given the drought conditions. But Thornwood Farm was no longer operating under normal circumstances. The men paused at the edge of the field, exactly where Sophia had predicted they would establish their position. The pock-marked leader pointed 2 of his men toward the northern edge of the field, while directing the 4th, the youngest one, to remain at the stream bed as a lookout. Their plan was becoming clear. They would start fires at opposite ends of the field, allowing the flames to meet in the middle and destroy the entire crop. Sophia reached for her lantern and gave another predetermined signal. 2 flashes, pause, then a third. Across the darkness, she saw an answering flash from the twins' position. The Carver men began unwrapping their torches, preparing to soak them in coal oil. The pockmarked leader struck a match, its small flame momentarily illuminating his satisfied expression. At that precise moment, a metallic click sounded beneath the feet of the man nearest the field's edge. The noise, though faint, was unmistakable. To anyone familiar with mechanical traps, the man froze, his eyes widening in sudden terror. "Don't!" he began to shout, but too late. The ground beneath him gave way with a sickening lurch. What had appeared to be solid earth was actually a camouflaged pit, its trapdoor triggered by the man's weight. His scream was cut short by the sound of sharpened stakes meeting flesh as he plummeted 8 feet down onto Sophia's carefully crafted impalement trap. Before the others could react, a tremendous whooshing sound filled the air as the seemingly dry stream bed suddenly flooded with water. Sophia had diverted part of her precious irrigation supply hours earlier, keeping it hidden beneath a thin layer of soil and debris that now washed away. The youngest carver man let out a startled curse as the water surged around his legs, throwing him off balance. "What the hell?" the pockmarked leader hissed, dropping his torch as chaos erupted around him. The third man, panicking at his companions' fate, turned to run, directly into a nearly invisible tripwire stretched at ankle height. As the wire snapped, it released a counterweight that swung a row of sharpened farming tools from their concealed position in a nearby tree. The makeshift scythes slashed across his path, opening a deep gash across his chest and face. Within seconds, what had begun as a simple intimidation operation had transformed into a desperate fight for survival. The pockmarked leader, more disciplined than his companions, dropped to a crouch and drew his pistol, eyes darting frantically in the darkness. "For targets! Come out, you bitch!" he shouted, his earlier pretense at civility abandoned. "I know you're watching." Sophia remained perfectly still in her blind, giving no indication of her position. Instead, she flashed another signal to the twins. 3 quick bursts this time. In response, Jonas, positioned at the northern edge of the property, fired a single shot into the air. The sound echoed across the farm, startling birds from their roosts. "They've spotted us!" hissed the young lookout, now slogging through knee-deep water as he tried to retreat from the stream bed. "Hold position," the leader ordered, though Sophia could detect uncertainty creeping into his command. Sophia blew, a small whistle, one of Jacob's old hunting calls. To anyone unfamiliar with frontier signals, it might have sounded like a nightbird or coyote. But to the carver men, already unnerved by the deadly traps, it registered as a deliberate human sound. The response was immediate. Jeremiah, hidden in the brush 70 yards away, fired his rifle. The bullet kicked up dirt just 3 feet from the pockmarked leader. A deliberate miss, but close enough to send a clear message. "That's a warning shot," the youngest carver man said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "They could have killed us already." The pockmarked leader hesitated, clearly reassessing the situation. What should have been a simple intimidation operation, burning part of a widow's crop to frighten her into selling, had unexpectedly encountered lethal resistance. The farm that had appeared vulnerable during daylight hours was revealing itself to be a death trap. Through her spyglass, Sophia could see the confusion spreading among the surviving intruders. Doubt was a powerful weapon, one that Jacob had taught her to deploy strategically. Make them question their intelligence, their planning, and eventually their mission, he'd explained during one of their evening discussions about frontier defense. The pockmarked leader gestured for his remaining men to retreat. They began moving back toward the boundary of the property, leaving behind their torches and coal oil, and the body of their companion in the pit trap. As they slogged through the water and mud, abandoning stealth in favor of a hasty withdrawal, Sophia gave her final signal of the night. 4 rapid flashes that activated the last phase of the evening's defense. Eli responded by firing a shotgun twice into the air, while Miguel ignited a series of small explosive charges buried along the property's edge. The explosions weren't designed to kill, merely to disorient and terrify. To the retreating intruders, it would appear that they were being driven into a deliberate ambush. "It's a trap!" shouted the youngest carver man, veering away from their planned escape route and heading instead toward the wooden fence that bordered the property. The group scattered, each man choosing a different escape route in their panic to avoid what they now believed was a coordinated attack by multiple defenders. Their coordination shattered, they crashed through underbrush and scrambled over fences, leaving behind their tools of destruction and the body of their companion as they fled into the darkness. Sophia remained motionless in her blind, watching through her spyglass until she was certain all the survivors had left her property. Only then did she signal to her team a long, steady light, indicating that the operation had concluded successfully. As she carefully made her way back to the house through a pre-planned route, Sophia mentally reviewed the night's events. The first test of her defenses had gone precisely as she had hoped. She had revealed enough of her capability to disrupt the Carver gang's initial attempt at intimidation, but not enough to show her full arsenal. Gabriel Carver would now be forced to reevaluate his approach. He would realize that Thornwood Farm wasn't as vulnerable as it appeared, that its widow owner had unexpected and deadly resources at her disposal. This would buy Sophia time to strengthen her position and implement the next phases of her strategy. Back in the farmhouse kitchen, Sophia met with her team to debrief. Eli, Mei Lin, Miguel and the twins gathered around the table, their expressions a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "We drove them off and they left one man dead," Eli reported. "Just like you planned, Miss Sophia." "For now," Sophia cautioned, "this was only their first attempt." She poured coffee for her team, her hands steady despite the night's tensions. "Carver won't give up so easily. Tonight was merely a probing action to test our defenses." "What do you think they'll report back to him?" Miguel asked. Sophia considered the question carefully. "That we were better prepared than expected. That we have lethal defenses and are willing to use them. That the helpless widow isn't quite as helpless as she appeared." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "But they won't have realized the full extent of our preparations. To them, this will seem like a desperate, if effective, response to their attack." "So what happens next?" Meilin asked. "Carver will return tomorrow as promised," Sophia replied. "He'll act surprised about the unfortunate incident last night, perhaps even offer protection against unknown troublemakers in the area." Her eyes hardened. "And when I decline his offer, he'll move to his next approach, likely more direct, possibly in daylight when they believe we'll be less prepared." "And will we be prepared, Mom?" Jonas asked. Sophia's smile was small but resolute. "More than they can possibly imagine." She unfolded a map of the property, revealing additional modifications she had planned. "Tonight was just the beginning. My friends, tomorrow we'll show the Carver gang what happens when they threaten Thornwood Farm." As her team discussed the details of the next day's preparations, Sophia's thoughts briefly turned to Jacob. She could almost feel his approving presence as she applied the principles they had developed together over years of theoretical discussions. About frontier defense. "The best defense," Jacob used to say, "isn't the one that defeats your enemy outright. It's the one that makes them defeat themselves." By dawn, Sophia Thorne would be ready to put that principle into action against Gabriel. Carver and his gang of killers. The deadly maze had claimed its first victim, but Thornwood Farm had many more surprises waiting for those foolish enough to return. Morning sunlight bathed Thornwood Farm in golden hues, revealing nothing of the night's violence. Sophia had ordered the removal of all evidence before dawn, the tripwires restrung, the pit camouflaged with fresh coverings, the stream bed returned to its deceptively dry appearance. Only a small, dark stain on the earth, where the killed man had been dragged away by his comrades, remained as testament to the confrontation. Standing on her porch, coffee cup in hand, Sophia spotted the approaching dust cloud that heralded Gabriel, Carver's return. Through her spyglass, she counted 12 riders this time, a significant escalation from yesterday's 5. The leader's bright red bandana was unmistakable even at a distance, a splash of color that resembled blood against the neutral tones of the drought-stricken landscape. "He's brought reinforcements," Eli observed, joining her on the porch. "As expected," Sophia replied calmly. "Prepare the inner defenses. We've moved to the second phase." While Eli hurried to convey her orders, Sophia retreated to her bedroom, where she changed into a high-necked black dress. Her mourning attire, from Jacob's death, carefully preserved for special occasions. The outfit would reinforce her image as a grieving widow, vulnerable and alone. Appearances, Jacob had taught her, were weapons as effective as any rifle when properly deployed. When Carver's expanded force arrived at her gate, Sophia was waiting, a picture of genteel frontier hospitality. Her hair was neatly pinned, her posture one of slight nervousness, a stark contrast to the precise, lethal woman who had orchestrated last night's defense. "Mr. Carver," she called out, her voice carrying just the right note of strained politeness. "I didn't expect you back so soon." Gabriel Carver dismounted with fluid grace, his movements those of a man accustomed to violence yet capable of restraint. Unlike yesterday, he wore no pretense of friendliness. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he approached the porch, flanked by two hard-faced men whose hands never strayed far from their weapons. "Mrs. Thorne," Carver said, his voice deceptively soft, "I believe we need to discuss what happened to some associates of mine last night." Sophia allowed her eyes to widen with rehearsed confusion. "Associates? I don't understand. 3 men were seriously injured on your property after midnight. A 4th never returned." Carver's gaze never left her face, searching for any flicker of acknowledgement. Curious injuries, the kind that don't happen by accident. "How terrible," Sophia replied, clutching at her collar in feigned distress. "Was it wolves? We've had trouble with a pack recently." Sheriff Parker said, "It wasn't wolves, Mrs. Thorne," Carver interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. "It was sharpened stakes, hidden pits, and well-placed rifle shots." "Mr. Carver," Sophia said, allowing a tremor to enter her voice, "are you suggesting someone set traps on my property?" "Who would do such a thing?" For a moment, genuine uncertainty flickered across Carver's face, the first crack in his composure. He had clearly expected either defiant admission or terrified denial, not this performance of innocent confusion. "May I offer you coffee?" Sophia continued, gesturing toward the house. "You look like you've had a difficult night." Carver exchanged glances with his lieutenants. "Coffee would be appreciated." The words came reluctantly, his strategy clearly disrupted by her unexpected approach. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, Sophia moved with deliberate efficiency, placing her finest china cups on the rough-hewn table where Jacob had carved their initials on their first anniversary. Through the window, she noted how Carver's men had positioned themselves around the property, not in casual groupings, but in tactical formations, providing maximum coverage. "You have a well-trained crew, Mr. Carver," she observed, pouring steaming coffee. Almost military in their precision. Carver's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Thorne, let's dispense with the pleasantries. Men in my employ were attacked on your property while conducting a legitimate security assessment for Whitmore Mining Company." "Security assessment?" Sophia echoed, arching an eyebrow as she passed him a cup. "Is that what you call men carrying torches and coal oil into a wheat field at midnight?" The directness of her response startled him. For a heartbeat, Carver sat perfectly still, reassessing the widow before him. Then, deliberately, he set down his untouched coffee. "So you admit you were aware of their presence?" "I admit nothing, Mr. Carver, but I find it curious that men conducting legitimate business would arrive in the dead of night, heavily armed with tools of arson." A tense silence stretched between them. Through the window, Sophia noticed Miguel and Maylene moving casually between outbuildings, appearing to conduct routine chores while actually preparing the farm's secondary defensive measures according to her earlier instructions. "Mrs. Thorne," Carver finally said, leaning forward, "I'll be direct since you seem to prefer that approach. Thornwood Farm will belong to Whitmore Mining. The only variable is whether you profit from the inevitable transaction or become another. Unfortunate statistic of frontier life." Sophia met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Carver, I appreciate your directness. Allow me to respond in kind." She folded her hands calmly on the table. "Any man who sets foot on my property with harmful intent will not leave it alive. That's not a threat. It's simply information you should consider in your business calculations." 4. The first time, genuine surprise registered on Carver's face. The innocent widow facade had been discarded completely, revealing something far more dangerous beneath. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said after a moment. "Perhaps both." "Neither, Mr. Carver. I'm simply practical." Sophia rose from the table, a clear signal that their meeting was concluding. "Please convey to Whitmore Mining that Thornwood Farm is not for sale, not at any price, not under any circumstances." Carver stood slowly, his composure recovered. "Mrs. Thorne, you've clearly prepared some impressive defenses. I commend your resourcefulness. But ask yourself this. How long can one widow and a handful of farmhands stand against determined opposition with unlimited resources?" "That," Sophia replied with the hint of a smile, "is precisely the question you should be asking about Whitmore Mining's position." As Carver departed, issuing quiet orders to his men, who immediately adjusted their positions around the property, Sophia knew she had forced an acceleration of his timetable. The night's probing attack had been meant to frighten her into selling. Its failure, coupled with her direct challenge, would compel him to move more aggressively. "They'll attack tonight," she told her assembled team an hour later in the barn, where they gathered around a detailed map of the property. "Full force, multiple approach vectors." "We're outnumbered," Jonas observed. "Even with the twins' shooting skills, we can't cover every approach." "We don't need to," Sophia replied, "because we're not fighting on their terms." She indicated key points on the map where red X marks denoted completed preparations. "Thornwood isn't just a farm anymore. It's a carefully designed killing ground that will divide their forces and eliminate their numerical advantage." She turned to Miguel. "Are the explosive trenches complete?" The Mexican nodded. "Sí, señora. North and west approaches are wired. Touch a flame to any single point and 6 charges will detonate in sequence. Mei Lin, the secondary traps." "All 30 trigger points are set," the young Chinese woman confirmed. "Pressure plates disguised under normal pathways, tripwires at chest height for mounted men, and the spike walls ready to deploy in the central corridor." Sophia nodded in satisfaction. "And the special modifications to the main house?" "Completed before dawn," Eli confirmed. "Every window is now a potential firing position with reinforced cover. The outer walls won't stop bullets, but the inner. Steel plates you designed will. Anyone who gets past the outer defenses and thinks the house is an easy target will have a deadly surprise waiting." For the remainder of the day, Thornwood Farm maintained the appearance of normal operations. Field work continued, animals were tended, and routine patrols established a visible but seemingly casual security presence. Carver's observers, whom Sophia had identified watching from distant ridgelines, would report minimal defensive preparations exactly as she intended. As dusk approached, Sophia gathered her defenders for final instructions. She had divided them into 3 teams. The twins would provide long-range covering fire from concealed positions. Miguel and 2 trusted hands would manage the explosive defenses. Eli, Mei Lin, and Sophia herself would coordinate the central response. From the fortified farmhouse. "Remember," she emphasized, her voice calm but commanding, "our objective isn't to defeat them in open battle, it's to make the cost of attacking Thornwood so high that Whitmore Mining abandons their campaign." She looked at each face in turn. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. "The traps and terrain will do most of our work. We simply guide our guests through our carefully prepared hospitality." As darkness settled over the farm, Sophia retreated to her command position in the reinforced attic of the main house. Through specially designed viewing ports, she could observe most of the property while remaining invisible from outside. A series of speaking tubes, originally installed by Jacob as an innovation for efficient farm management, allowed her to communicate with key defensive positions. By 8 o'clock, her scouts reported movement along the western ridge. Through Her spyglass, Sophia counted at least 20 mounted men assembling in the darkness, a force large enough to overwhelm any normal farm's defenses. Carver had clearly decided to end the situation with overwhelming force. "They're splitting into 3 groups," came Jeremiah's hushed report through the speaking tube. 8 riders approaching from the west, 7 from the north, and Carver, himself, leading 5 directly toward the main house. "Perfect," Sophia whispered. "Exactly as anticipated." She had designed her defenses specifically to channel attackers into smaller groups that could be dealt with individually. "Confirm positions, but hold fire until my signal." For the next 30 minutes, Sophia tracked the approaching forces through reports from her concealed observers. The Carver gang moved with practiced coordination, maintaining proper spacing and using natural cover, professional killers executing a well-planned assault. What they couldn't know was that every apparent weakness in Thornwood's perimeter was deliberately designed, every obvious approach a carefully constructed death trap. Sophia had spent years considering how to defend her property against superior numbers, and tonight those preparations would be fully tested. At precisely 9:15, the Western group reached the first line of defense, an apparently carelessly maintained section of fence offering easy access to the property. As the riders dismounted to move through the gap, Miguel ignited the first explosive sequence. The night erupted in chaos as buried charges detonated in rapid succession, sending deadly shrapnel tearing through the attackers. Screams cut through the darkness as men and horses fell, the carefully calculated blasts designed not for maximum death but for maximum confusion and injury. The northern group, hearing the explosions, hesitated briefly before continuing their advance, directly into Malin's web of mechanical traps. Tripwires triggered falling blade mechanisms, covered pits opened beneath horses' hooves, and hidden nooses snapped upward to unseat riders. Within minutes, the coordinated attack had disintegrated into isolated pockets of terrified, disoriented men fighting not enemies, but the land itself. Through it all, Sophia remained calm at her command post, issuing precise instructions based on reports flowing in through the speaking tubes. When 3 men broke through the outer defenses and approached the barn, she directed the twins to disable them with carefully placed shots to shoulders and legs, painful but not immediately lethal. "They're in full retreat on the north and west," Eli reported excitedly. "At least 7 men down, maybe more." "And Carver's group?" Sophia asked, her focus unwavering. "Still approaching the main house. They've moved more cautiously after hearing the explosions." Sophia nodded to herself. This was the critical moment. Carver himself had to experience the full psychological impact of her defenses, not just hear reports from his men. "Prepare the final welcome," she instructed. "Let Carver reach the house." Minutes later, Gabriel, Carver and his 3 remaining men, 2 had been lost to concealed traps on the approach, reached the darkened farmhouse. Finding the front door unlocked, they entered cautiously, weapons drawn, into what appeared to be an abandoned home. "Mrs. Thorne," Carver called out, his voice echoing in the silence. "This ends tonight, one way or another." Sophia's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filtered through the network of speaking tubes she had modified for this precise scenario. "Indeed it does, Mr. Carver, though perhaps not as you imagined." At her signal, Mei Lin ignited the final defensive measure, a series of specialized lamps that suddenly flared to life, bathing the room in blinding light while leaving her defenders protected in carefully constructed shadows. Before Carver and his men could react, the twins opened fire from concealed positions within the house, their shots precisely targeted to wound rather than kill. 2 of Carver's men fell immediately, crying out in pain and surprise. The 3rd fled toward what seemed to be an escape route, only to crash through weakened floorboards into a cellar filled with sharpened stakes. Carver himself, demonstrating the reflexes that had made him notorious, dove for cover behind an overturned table. Exactly where Sophia had positioned herself minutes earlier, her husband's revolver aimed steadily at the spot where his head would appear. "Mr. Carver," she said quietly, pressing the cold barrel against his temple, "I believe this concludes our business negotiations." Blood trickled from a cut on Gabriel Carver's forehead as he stared up at Sophia, his expression shifting from shock to calculating assessment. Outside, the sounds of chaos continued, wounded men crying out for help, horses fleeing in panic, occasional gunfire as the twins picked off anyone attempting to regroup. "Impressive," he said finally, his voice steady, despite the revolver pressed against his temple. "I underestimated you badly, Mrs. Thorne." "Most men do," Sophia replied. She gestured with her free hand, and Eli emerged from the shadows, his shotgun trained on Carver's chest. "Bind his hands." As Eli secured Carver with rope, Sophia maintained her vigilance, never allowing the gang leader a moment to exploit any lapse in attention. Through the speaking tubes came reports of the battle's conclusion, the remaining attackers in full retreat, leaving behind their dead and wounded, their coordination shattered by the unexpected ferocity and sophistication of Thornwood's defenses. "7 confirmed dead, Miss Sophia," came Miguel's report. "At least 5 more wounded too badly to flee. We're securing them in the old tobacco shed." "Treat their wounds," Sophia instructed, "but keep them isolated from each other." She turned, her attention back to Carver, who watched her with newfound respect, mingled with the first traces of genuine fear. "You've won this round decisively," he acknowledged, "but Whitmore Mining doesn't suffer defeats. They'll send more men, a small army if necessary." "Perhaps," Sophia said, gesturing for Eli to bring Carver to his feet. "But first, Mr. Carver, you and I are going to have a conversation about the true economics of this situation." She led him through the house to Jacob's study, a room she had intentionally left unmodified during her defensive preparations. Here, surrounded by her husband's books and maps, with his favorite pipe still resting in its stand as if he might return any moment to claim it, Sophia felt most connected to the strategic mind that had helped shape her own. "Sit," she commanded, indicating a chair positioned where the lamplight would fall directly on Carver's face while leaving her own in shadow. Another lesson from Jacob about interrogation techniques. "You're not just a farmer's widow," Carver observed, testing the strength of his bonds discreetly. "Military background. My husband was the strategist," Sophia replied, seating herself behind Jacob's desk. "I merely paid attention." She removed a folded document from a drawer and laid it before her. "Do you know what this is, Mr. Carver?" He squinted in the uneven light. "Appears to be a land survey. Not just any survey. This is the territorial geologist's official assessment of Thornwood Farm and the surrounding 10 square miles. Sophia tapped the document meaningfully. "Conducted 3 years ago at my request after Jacob's death. Do you know what it revealed?" Carver's eyes narrowed. "I'm guessing it's more than water rights that make this property valuable." "Much more." Sophia allowed herself a small smile. "There's a silver vein running beneath the eastern section of my property. One of the richest deposits in the territory, according to the survey. Whitmore Mining has known this for at least 18 months, based on their own geological research." Understanding dawned on Carver's face. That's why they authorized such aggressive tactics. This isn't about water rights or farming land. It's about millions in silver they can extract at minimal cost if they acquire Thornwood for a fraction of its true value, Sophia finished for him, which brings us to your position in this scenario. She stood and moved to the window, careful to remain to the side where she couldn't be targeted from outside. Through the glass, she could see her team efficiently securing the battlefield, collecting weapons from the fallen attackers and ensuring no threats remained. "Whitmore Mining hired you to clear me off this land cheaply and quietly," she continued. I assume they're paying you a percentage of what they save by avoiding a fair market transaction. Carver said nothing, but his expression confirmed her assessment. Tonight has demonstrated that continuing your current approach will be exceedingly costly in both men and materials, Sophia noted, but I'm offering you an alternative that could prove far more profitable. Now she had his full attention. Whatever Carver had expected from this confrontation, execution perhaps or imprisonment, it clearly wasn't a business proposition. I'm listening, he said cautiously. Sophia returned to the desk and drew out another document, this one bearing the official seal of the Territorial Governor's Office. This is a mining rights partnership agreement drawn up by my lawyer in Fort Callahan 6 months ago, when I first heard rumors of Whitmore's interest in my land. It establishes a joint venture between the landowner, me, and a mining operation, partner to be named. She placed it before him. I'm prepared to offer you that partnership position. Carver stared at her in disbelief. You want to go into business with the man who just tried to kill you? I want to go into business with a man smart enough to recognize when circumstances have changed, Sophia corrected. The terms are straightforward. I retain land ownership and water rights. The partner provides mining expertise and operations. Profits are split 60-40 in my favor. Whitmore would never accept such terms, Carver said. Whitmore isn't being offered these terms, Sophia replied coolly. They made their choice when they sent men with torches to burn out a widow instead of approaching me with a legitimate business proposition. She leaned forward, her eyes locked with his. You have connections throughout the territory, Mr. Carver. Access to men with mining experience, the ability to organize operations. With my land and your expertise, we could be extracting silver within 3 months, cutting Whitmore out entirely. For a long moment, Carver sat in silence, the calculation visible in his eyes as he weighed betraying his employer against the potential profits of Sophia's proposal. What's to stop me from agreeing now, then returning with more men once I'm free? He asked finally. Sophia smiled thinly. 3 things, Mr. Carver. First, you've seen only a fraction of Thornwood's defenses tonight. Second, by morning, detailed accounts of your operations throughout the territory will reach the territorial governor, the federal marshal in Fort Callahan, and 3 newspaper editors, unless I send riders to intercept those messengers. She paused, letting the implication sink in. And third, men like you survive by reputation. How would your future employers view you if they learned you'd been comprehensively outmaneuvered by a widow with a farm? A reluctant smile tugged at Carver's mouth. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Not everything, Sophia admitted. Just enough to change the circumstances from what you expected to what I required. She produced a small key and unlocked his restraints. You have until dawn to decide. My terms or the consequences of tonight's failure, both with the law and with Whitmore Mining, who I suspect are not forgiving of such expensive disappointments. As the night wore on, Sophia coordinated the cleanup of her battleground. The dead were laid out respectfully in the barn, personal effects catalogued for return to families where possible. The wounded received treatment from Maylin, whose knowledge of herbal medicine proved as valuable as her skill with mechanical traps. In the small hours before dawn, Gabriel Carver requested another meeting. He found Sophia in the kitchen, calmly preparing breakfast for her team, as if the night's violence had been nothing more extraordinary than a summer storm. I've considered your proposal, he said without preamble. It's unconventional, but potentially profitable for both parties. And your decision? Sophia asked, continuing to slice bread with the same steady hands that had held him at gunpoint hours earlier. I accept your terms, with 2 conditions. Carver straightened, some of his commanding presence returning now that he negotiated as a potential partner rather than a defeated enemy. First, my men who survived, including the wounded, receive fair treatment and the opportunity to work legitimately in our mining operation if they choose. Sophia nodded. Acceptable, provided they understand that any return to their previous methods will be met with permanent consequences. And your second condition, that you explain how a farmer's widow transformed this property into the most elaborate defensive system I've ever encountered, including during the war. Genuine curiosity had replaced his earlier antagonism. I've led military operations that were less sophisticated than what you orchestrated tonight. Sophia set down her knife and studied him thoughtfully. The question wasn't just professional interest. It revealed something about Carver's character, a grudging respect that might form the foundation of a workable partnership. Very well, she agreed, but that explanation comes after you've demonstrated good faith by sending messengers to Whitmore Mining, declining further action against Thornwood Farm. By mid-morning, riders had been dispatched, 2 to the mining company headquarters 3 days' journey away, and others to nearby settlements where news of the failed attack on Thornwood Farm would quickly spread. The territorial grapevine would ensure that Sophia's reputation was firmly established. The widow who had transformed her vulnerable farm into an impenetrable fortress, defeating the notorious Carver gang at their own game. As promised, once the messengers were away, Sophia led Carver on a tour of Thornwood's defenses. In daylight, with the immediate danger past, she revealed the full extent of her preparations, not just the traps and ambush points, but the strategic thinking behind each element. The farm's layout isn't accidental, she explained, pointing to seemingly random features that formed a coherent defensive network. Jacob designed it from the beginning, with protection in mind. Each field, each building, each pathway serves dual purposes. She showed him the underground irrigation system that could be instantly converted to flood-specific approaches, the outbuildings positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire, the concealed observation posts that allowed comprehensive monitoring of the property. But defending fixed positions is fundamental, Carver observed. The real sophistication was in your coordination. You maneuvered my men exactly where you wanted them. Sophia nodded. That was my contribution to Jacob's original design. He created the fortress. I created the maze. She pointed to the speaking tube system that connected key positions. Communication and timing are what transform static defenses into an active response network. As they completed the tour atop a small rise overlooking the farm, Carver shook, his head in reluctant admiration. Whitmore Mining never stood a chance, did they? Neither did you, Sophia replied frankly. But unlike them, you've proven adaptable enough to recognize when your strategy has been countered. She extended her hand in a business-like gesture. Partners, then. You handle the mining operations and the territorial politics. I'll manage the land and security. Carver hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. Partners. Though, I pity anyone who crosses you in the future, Mrs. Thorne. Most won't see the danger until it's too late, Sophia said with quiet confidence. Just as you didn't. Over the following weeks, Thornwood Farm underwent another transformation. The deadly traps were carefully documented, then mostly disassembled as the property shifted from defensive fortress to operational headquarters for the newly formed Thornwood Silver Company. Men who had attacked the farm now labored to establish mining operations on its eastern section, their former hostility replaced by wary respect for the widow who had defeated them. Gabriel Carver proved surprisingly effective as operations manager, his natural authority and organizational skills well suited to the complex logistics of mineral extraction. Sheriff Parker, responding belatedly to reports of gunfire at the farm, found himself presented with a legitimate business partnership rather than the bloody aftermath of bandit violence he had expected. His confusion only increased when former members of the Carver gang politely offered to register as law-abiding residents of the territory. 1 month after the night battle that had decided Thornwood's fate, Sophia stood beside Jacob's grave in the cool evening air. The sounds of construction from the eastern ridge, temporary buildings for the mining operation, carried faintly on the breeze. "Not what we planned," she said softly to the weathered marker. "But I protected what was ours, just as you taught me." Her fingers traced the carved name tenderly. "I turned their strength against them, made them defeat themselves. The greatest victory is the one where your enemy becomes your ally." As darkness fell, lamps winked on throughout the property, no longer signaling defensive positions, but marking the boundaries of a growing enterprise. Sophia Thorne, once dismissed as a vulnerable widow clinging to her husband's legacy, had established herself as a force to be reckoned with throughout the territory. "Mrs. Thorne," called Eli from the porch. Mr. Carver's returned from Fort Callahan, with the final permits and some interesting news about Whitmore mining. Sophia smiled and turned toward the house. The deadly maze had served its purpose, transforming danger into opportunity. Now she would build something new on the foundation of respect her strategic brilliance had commanded, a legacy entirely her own. "Coming, Eli," she replied. "I believe we have some celebrating to do." 6 months after the night Gabriel Carver's men fell prey to Thornwood's deadly maze. The once isolated farmstead had transformed into an operation that dominated the regional economy. Where wheat fields had stretched to the horizon, orderly mining structures now rose alongside agricultural plots. The silver strike had proven even richer than the territorial survey suggested, its high-grade ore yielding profits that exceeded even Sophia's calculated projections. The main house, still serving as Sophia's residence, had expanded to include offices from which she directed the business aspects of their growing enterprise. The defensive systems remained, though modified, less lethal but equally effective at securing the valuable operation against opportunistic thieves or corporate saboteurs. "Production report from the Eastern Shaft," Maylin announced, entering. Sophia's study with a sheaf of papers. No longer just a farmhand, the young Chinese woman had revealed an exceptional talent for numbers and now served as Thornwood's head accountant. "We've exceeded last month's output by 17%. Sophia nodded as she reviewed the figures. "And the refining costs?" "Lower than expected. Miguel's new smelting technique is proving more efficient than standard methods." Like many of Sophia's original defenders, Miguel had found his skills valued in ways the outside world had never appreciated. His knowledge of explosives, once used to create deadly traps, now served to open new mining shafts with precision that minimized waste and maximized safety. A knock at the doorframe interrupted their discussion. Sheriff Parker stood there, his expression a mixture of respect and lingering bewilderment at how completely the power dynamics in his territory had shifted. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, removing his hat. "Got a telegram from the capital you might want to see." He extended an envelope bearing the territorial governor's seal. Sophia opened it and scanned the contents, her composed expression betraying nothing of her thoughts. "Thank you, Sheriff. Please tell Mr. Carver I'd like to see him when he returns from the North Shaft." After Parker departed, Sophia passed the telegram to Maylin. "It seems Whitmore Mining has filed a formal complaint with the territorial offices, alleging theft of proprietary geological data and interference with legitimate business interests." Maylin's eyes widened. "After 6 months? Why now?" "Because now we're an established threat," Sophia replied. "Our first silver shipment to the Federal Mint in Denver confirmed what they've feared. Thornwood is becoming too successful to ignore." She moved to the large map of the territory that dominated one wall of her study. Colored pins marked various properties and mining claims, with Thornwood at the center of an expanding network of influence. What had begun as a single farm's defense had evolved into a regional economic force that directly challenged Whitmore's long-standing dominance. "They'll send lawyers next," Sophia predicted. "Then political pressure. Failing those, they'll attempt more direct methods again. But we're better prepared now," Maylin observed. "Yes and no." Sophia studied the map thoughtfully. "We have more resources, but also more vulnerabilities. A larger operation means more points of potential attack. Supply lines, shipping routes, banking relationships." She turned as Gabriel Carver entered, trail dust still clinging to his clothes from his inspection of their northern claims. In 6 months, their unlikely partnership had evolved into a relationship of genuine respect. While never warm, their interactions had the easy efficiency of two professionals who recognized each other's complementary strengths. "Whitmore's finally making their official move," she said without preamble, handing him the telegram. Carver scanned it, his expression darkening. "I expected this weeks ago. Vernon Whitmore doesn't tolerate competition, especially not from those he considered easy targets." He met Sophia's gaze directly. "They'll send Harrison Pinkerton next." "The attorney?" Sophia asked. "The fixer," Carver corrected. "Officially Whitmore's legal counsel, unofficially their specialist in eliminating problems through various means. Some legal, most not. I've worked alongside him on previous acquisitions." He set the telegram down. "He's more dangerous than I ever was, Sophia. He doesn't just rely on force. He corrupts from within, finds weaknesses, turns allies against each other." Sophia absorbed this information with the same methodical focus she applied to all tactical challenges. "Then we'll need to accelerate our contingency planning." She moved to her desk and unlocked a drawer containing documents few had seen. "I've been preparing for this confrontation since before you arrived at Thornwood." She spread out papers, revealing an intricate network of financial arrangements, property acquisitions, and political connections extending far beyond what Carver had realized she controlled. "These past 6 months," she explained, "while we've been developing the mine, I've been systematically acquiring key properties throughout the supply chain Whitmore depends on." She indicated specific locations on the map. The Eastern Staging Depot, the Southern Shipping Office, 3 strategic water sources for their primary operations, and most recently, controlling interest in the bank that finances their territorial expansion. Carver stared at the documents in astonishment. "How did you manage this without alerting them?" "Proxy buyers, shell companies, methods I observed during Jacob's dealings. With frontier speculators." Sophia's expression remained impassive, but satisfaction glinted in her eyes. "Whitmore has been so focused on direct competition with our mining operation that they failed to secure their operational foundations." "You haven't just been defending Thornwood," Carver realized. "You've been systematically encircling Whitmore, mining itself." "The best defense is a carefully structured offense," Sophia confirmed. "Jacob taught me that years ago." For the next week, Thornwood operated under heightened security as they prepared for Whitmore's response. Sophia implemented what she called visible precautions: armed guards at mine entrances, increased patrols, reinforced shipping protocols. These measures would be immediately apparent to any observer. More importantly, she activated her hidden preparations, financial maneuvers designed to pressure Whitmore's credit lines, selective information shared with territorial officials raising questions about Whitmore's tax compliance, and quiet reinforcement of her network of allies throughout the region. Harrison Pinkerton arrived with the autumn's first cold snap. A well-dressed figure whose carefully groomed appearance belied the ruthlessness Carver had described. Unlike the direct threat Carver had presented months earlier, Pinkerton approached with apparent civility, requesting a formal business meeting at Thornwood's offices. "Mrs. Thorne," he greeted her with practiced charm, accepting the seat she offered in her study. "I must compliment you on what you've built here. Quite remarkable for a recent widow with no previous mining experience." "Necessity breeds capability, Mr. Pinkerton," Sophia replied evenly. "Though I suspect you haven't traveled 3 days to deliver compliments." He smiled thinly. "Direct, just as I was informed. Very well." He removed documents from his leather portfolio. "Whitmore Mining Company has authorized me to offer you a generous buyout of your operation. Full value for all improvements, plus a 20% premium in recognition of your ingenuity." Sophia accepted the papers, but didn't open them. "And if I'm not interested in selling?" "Then matters grow unfortunately complicated." Pinkerton's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "Whitmore Mining has extensive evidence suggesting your geological surveys improperly utilize proprietary data. Additionally, questions have arisen regarding the legitimacy of your mineral rights claims under territorial statutes." "Manufactured allegations," Sophia observed. "Perhaps," Pinkerton conceded with a slight shrug, "but allegations that would require lengthy and expensive legal proceedings to contest, proceedings during which mining operations might be suspended, pending resolution." Sophia set the unopened offer aside. "Mr. Pinkerton, before we continue this discussion, I'd like to show you something." She rose and moved to the large wall safe behind her desk, unlocking it with a combination she shielded from his view. From within, she retrieved a leather-bound journal and a stack of correspondence bearing official seals from various territorial offices. "Are you familiar with the name Senator James Whitfield?" she asked. Pinkerton's careful composure flickered briefly. "The chairman of the Territorial Resources Committee. What of him?" "He's also Vernon Whitmore's primary silent partner and the source of Whitmore Mining's political protection." Sophia laid out several letters bearing Whitfield's signature. "These documents detail his improper influence in territorial mining rights allocations over the past 5 years, specifically directing valuable claims to Whitmore while denying them to competing interests." Pinkerton's expression remained controlled, but his posture had stiffened. "Where did you obtain these?" Jacob maintained extensive correspondence with territorial officials during his lifetime. After his death, certain sympathetic parties continued to provide information they felt might protect his widow from predatory interests. Sophia's tone made it clear this was no bluff. "The complete record has been deposited with 3 separate attorneys, with instructions for public release should anything untoward happen to me or my operation." She let the implication hang in the air between them before continuing. "Additionally, you should know that as of last Tuesday, Thornwood Holdings now controls 57% of the railway spur line that services Whitmore's primary refining facility, 38% of their primary creditors' secured debt, and exclusive water rights to 2 aquifers they require for planned expansion." For the first time, genuine surprise registered on Pinkerton's face. "That's not possible. Those assets weren't for sale." "Everything has a price, Mr. Pinkerton. You simply need to identify the appropriate leverage." Sophia returned to her seat, her posture relaxed but authoritative. "Now, shall we discuss a more equitable arrangement between our organizations?" The negotiation that followed wasn't a capitulation, but a careful redrawing of territorial power dynamics. Pinkerton, recognizing that Sophia held far more leverage than Whitmore had anticipated, shifted from threats to practical compromise. By evening, they had outlined a framework that would allow both operations to coexist profitably, with clearly delineated claims, shared infrastructure costs, and mutual non-interference guarantees. Vernon won't be pleased with these terms, Pinkerton admitted as they concluded their discussion. He expected to absorb Thornwood completely. Mr. Whitmore has grown accustomed to unchallenged authority, Sophia observed. Adaptation will be educational for him. After Pinkerton departed with the draft agreement, Carver joined Sophia on the front porch, where she sat watching the evening activity of their bustling operation. "I've never seen Pinkerton negotiate away from strength before," he remarked, settling into the chair beside her. "He's eliminated operations twice our size without blinking, because those operations fought on his terms," Sophia replied. "They tried to match Whitmore's political influence or financial resources directly, a battle they couldn't win. While you changed the nature of the conflict entirely." Carver nodded with appreciation. "Controlling their operational necessities rather than challenging their core strength." The autumn sunset painted Thornwood's buildings in hues of gold and amber, the same colors that had first attracted Jacob to this land 15 years earlier. Though transformed from the simple farm he had established, the property still reflected his vision: self-sufficient, strategically positioned, designed to endure. "Vernon Whitmore will still try something," Carver warned after a comfortable silence. "Men like him don't accept limitation easily." "I'm counting on it," Sophia replied, "which is why tomorrow we'll implement the final phase of our strategy." "There's more?" Carver asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Sophia smiled slightly. "Did you think I revealed all my leverage to Pinkerton? That would be tactically unsound." The following morning, riders left Thornwood carrying sealed messages to key financial institutions throughout the territory. Simultaneously, Sophia dispatched telegrams to business associates in Denver, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco. The content of these communications remained confidential, known only to Sophia herself, but their effect became apparent within days. Credit lines previously available to Whitmore Mining were suddenly restricted. Shipping contracts came under unexpected review. Suppliers began demanding payment in advance rather than extending traditional terms. Most significantly, 3 major investors requested urgent meetings with Vernon Whitmore regarding concerning information about the company's practices. 2 weeks after Pinkerton's visit, Sophia received a telegram from Vernon Whitmore himself, requesting a private meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest. Rather than inviting him to Thornwood, where she held every advantage, Sophia proposed neutral ground, the territorial governor's residence in the capital. Governor Harlan Francis had largely ignored the power struggle between Thornwood and Whitmore until recent weeks, when Sophia's carefully released information made neutrality politically untenable. Now he served as official host to a meeting that would reshape the territory's economic landscape. Mrs. Thorne, Vernon Whitmore greeted her with stiff formality in the governor's wood-paneled study. A corpulent man with cold eyes and an expensive waistcoat, he exuded the confidence of someone accustomed to deference. "I believe we've been working at cross purposes unnecessarily." "Not unnecessarily, Mr. Whitmore," Sophia corrected. "You attempted to seize my property through intimidation and violence. I responded appropriately." Governor Francis, seated behind his desk, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we could focus on future arrangements rather than past misunderstandings." "An excellent suggestion," Sophia agreed, turning her attention to the documents she had brought. "I've prepared a comprehensive proposal for restructuring the Territorial Mining Authority to ensure fair competition and prevent monopolistic practices that have historically disadvantaged independent operators." For the next 2 hours, she outlined regulatory reforms that would fundamentally transform how mining rights were allocated and enforced throughout the territory. Whitmore's initial dismissiveness gave way to growing alarm as he realized the governor was responding positively to Sophia's proposals. "This is outrageous," he finally interrupted. "These regulations would cripple established operations while favoring upstarts with no proven record." "On the contrary," Sophia replied calmly, "they would simply ensure that success derives from operational excellence rather than political manipulation. Companies with superior methods, like yours presumably, should thrive under fair competition." The subtle threat beneath her words was clear. Sophia possessed enough evidence of Whitmore's corrupt practices to destroy his company if fully revealed. The choice now facing him was adaptation or annihilation. By the meeting's conclusion, a framework agreement had been reached. Whitmore Mining would retain its existing claims and continue operations under the new regulatory structure. In exchange, they would abandon all actions against Thornwood and support the proposed reforms publicly. As they prepared to depart, Whitmore paused beside Sophia, his voice pitched low to avoid the governor's hearing. "You've won this round conclusively, Mrs. Thorne, but remember, fortunes in this territory change rapidly." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "Indeed they do, Mr. Whitmore. One day a widow struggles to hold her farm. The next, she controls the future of the largest mining operation in 3 territories." She smiled slightly. "Changes can be most educational. 1 year to the day after Gabriel Carver first rode onto her property with threats and torches, Sophia Thorne stood on the steps of the newly constructed Thornwood Company headquarters in the territorial capital. Before her gathered employees, business associates, and government officials, she prepared to formally open an enterprise that had expanded beyond mining into banking, transportation, and regional development. Beside her stood her core team, Eli, now operations director, Maylin financial controller, Miguel engineering chief, and the twins heading security. Gabriel Carver, having proven himself a valuable partner, managed their mining division with the same efficiency he had once directed. Toward threatening vulnerable targets, Thornwood began as one man's dream of independence, Sophia told the assembled crowd. Jacob believed that with strategic thinking and proper preparation, even the most vulnerable position could be transformed into one of strength. Her gaze swept across faces that had once looked to her for protection and now looked to her for leadership. "When threatened, we defended what was ours. When challenged, we expanded our capabilities. When underestimated," she smiled slightly, "we educated those who failed to recognize that apparent vulnerability can conceal remarkable strength." As applause rose from the gathering, Sophia glanced briefly toward the small photograph of Jacob she kept in a silver locket around her neck. The deadly maze she had created to defend his legacy had evolved into something far greater, a new kind of fortress built on strategic intelligence rather than physical barriers. Carver joined her as the crowd began to disperse following the ceremony. "Quite a journey from that first confrontation," he observed, "though I still maintain the most remarkable aspect was your transformation of enemies into allies." "Not transformation," Sophia corrected. "Recognition. I simply created circumstances where your natural capabilities served my objectives rather than opposed them." She surveyed the thriving business that had grown from her defensive strategy. "The strongest position isn't the one that eliminates all opposition, but the one that channels opposition into productive directions." That evening, as light faded across the prosperous territory that Thornwood now significantly influenced, Sophia returned alone to the original farmhouse she maintained as her private residence. Though her business headquarters had moved to the capital, she had preserved the heart of Jacob's homestead, a reminder of where everything had begun. In the fading light, she walked to the cottonwood tree where Jacob and Daniel rested. The deadly maze that had once surrounded this spot had served its purpose, protecting what she valued most when direct confrontation would have meant defeat. Now different kinds of defenses, financial, political, structural, secured the empire she had built from a widow's desperate strategy. They came with torches, thinking I was defenseless, she told the weathered markers softly. They never saw the real threat until it was too late. She touched the rough wood of Jacob's headstone gently. Just as you taught me. As darkness settled. Over Thornwood Farm, lights winked on in distant mine buildings and processing facilities. What had begun as a desperate widow's defense had transformed an entire territory. The bandits who had once threatened her crops had instead harvested a whirlwind of their own destruction, their arrogance becoming the seeds of Sophia Thorne's unlikely rise to power. For in the end, the deadliest maze hadn't been the physical traps that claimed their comrades, but the strategic labyrinth created by a woman they had fatally underestimated, a labyrinth from which there had been no escape, only transformation on her terms. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.